In this video, I'm going to explain to you why the dollar is losing its value and what you need to do to protect yourself.
China is now trying to replace the U.S. dollar with their currency in global trade.
Also to start the year, well, going in the opposite direction is the dollar. Weakness here has persisted now for several weeks. In fact, this is a downturn that really started late last year here.
Before we get into that, I need you to subscribe to my YouTube channel by clicking on the subscription button below, because I upload videos several times a week. The US currency has been the world's reserve currency for decades. It's America's last surviving superpower. It gives Congress an unparalleled economic and political advantage. Slap sanctions on countries, paralyzing that countries out of the large part of the world's economy. America can spend freely with the assurance that its debts will be bought by other countries around the world. The great demand for the dollar makes it attractive for U.S. bonds and oftentimes allows us to live beyond our means. But now the notion that nothing can dislodge the dollar from its preeminent status as the world currency is overblown and ultimately being challenged right now.
For the people who work numbers, I am giving you free advice that those of you who are holding dollars, you surely might go into losses. You better do what you must do, because this market is going to be different in a couple of weeks.
The value of the dollar has been depreciating steadily for the past 50 years, creating a perfect opportunity for other alternative currencies to rise. The dollar has declined by 86%. So does this mean the end of the world? Absolutely not. My goal is not to create fear and panic, but to make you aware of the changes around us and how we should ride on the wave to enhance and better our lives. History shows that the world's currency changes almost every 100 years since the 1400s, and the reign of the almighty dollar is definitely heading towards its end. So it happened in World War I. The US was well positioned during World War II. After the combat began, the United States became the leading supplier of weapons and other goods for its allies. Most countries paid in gold, making the US own most of the world's goods by the end of the war. So countries that depleted in their gold stocks struggled to remit weapons purchases with the United States. So in 1944, the representatives from 44 allied countries met in Bretton Woods in New Hampshire to develop a strategy to manage foreign exchange transactions that will be reasonable to any country. The delegation agreed that the world's currencies would no longer be linked to gold, but rather it could be pegged to the US dollar because it was tied to gold itself.
At Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, delegates from 44 allied and associate countries arrived for the opening of the United Nations Monetary and Financial Conference. He addresses the meeting. To be discussed are plans for the stabilization of world currencies. All agreements must be ratified by the governing bodies of the nations involved before becoming effective.
This established the authority of central banks, which would maintain fixed exchange rates between their currencies and the US dollar. In turn, the United States will redeem the US dollar for gold on demand. It allowed some level of control over currency in situations where the value of their own currency was very fragile compared to the US dollar. The US dollar was officially crowned as the world's reserve currency, and it was backed by the world's largest gold reserves, thanks to the Bretton Woods Agreement. Instead of gold reserves, other countries accumulated reserves of US dollars as the currency held in significant quantities by countries and institutions worldwide as part of their foreign exchange reserves. According to the IMF, over 60% of all foreign exchange services held by the central banks worldwide are denominated in dollars. Saudi Arabia is considering ending the petrodollar system by joining BRICS. BRICS is an acronym for the powerful grouping of the world's leading emerging market economies. And this includes Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. The BRICS countries are working on a currency system that will be an alternative currency to the US dominated global financial system. BRICS money is backed with gold, so it has a solid and reliable value, while the US dollar has nothing to offer, just, a piece of paper, really, if you think about it. This means that other countries will need to start to sell off their US currency, which will cause the value of the US dollar to plummet and will cause hyperinflation and a decline in the purchasing power for the average American. And it will also cause a global, recession if you think of it. So the U.S. finances its debts by selling it as bonds, notes, treasuries to other countries. But if countries no longer hold U.S. dollars, they will stop buying America's treasuries or bonds, making it hard for America to finance its debts. America will be in default on its debt. Now, let me ask you this question. Which countries owns the largest part of America's debts? Japan and China. Isn't that interesting? Japan and China, who are the largest owners of U.S. debt, reduced their holdings. As a matter of fact, China's U.S. Treasury holdings fell to a 12-year low in 2022. The latest data shows that China is continuing to slash its holdings even in December, making the fifth straight month of cuts and leaving its holdings below 1 trillion for the eighth straight month since April of last year. The US has a history of needing to improve at balancing debts. In 1971, towards the end of the Vietnam War, the US had a massive fiscal deficit. So in the same way you fear for your money if your bank makes bad investment, countries with their reserves in the US dollars started to feel uneasy about how the US was handling their finances. So they started getting nervous at the prospects of America eventually being unable to redeem its debt. They started buying back their gold, which is the equivalent of a bank run. The US realized this and unilaterally decided to let the dollar float in what is now, known as the Nixon shock.
I have directed Secretary Connally to suspend temporarily the convertibility of the dollar into gold or other reserve assets, except in amounts and conditions.
So it was a virtual default and the era of the fiat currency began. As an immediate result, high inflation in the 70s put the U.S. economy in great danger. The U.S. had to figure out how to stabilize the dollar and solidify it as the world's reserve currency. So this was a complex problem because now, as a fiat currency, it was backed only by the trust in the U.S. economy rather than an actual asset such as gold. So the government essentially forced the dollar on everyone by taking over the oil market. A deal was struck with Saudi Arabia, by far the biggest producer of the crude oil in the 70s. So the deal required Saudi Arabia to sell their oil exclusively in dollars. In exchange, the U.S. offered the Saudis weapons and protection, which they readily accepted, given the multiple Middle East propensity for military conflict, which was partly exacerbated by the U.S. itself. And that's how the petrodollar system was born. The idea was to make the dollar the foundation of the global oil trade, creating the demand to prevent too much inflation. The problem, of course, is that this didn't get rid of inflation per se. It just externalized it to the whole world. Since then, the dollar has lost 30 times its purchasing power relative to gold. In a way, it was easier for everyone, even if you had your differences with the U.S. to trade in the U.S. dollar, because it made the market more accessible, competitive, and even transparent. The U.S. guaranteed this to ensure the stability of the dollar. Soon after the Saudi deal, the world traded oil in dollars, even Russia. Can you imagine? Since then, the U.S. has defended this fiercely, oftentimes through military force. Gaddafi, Saddam Hussein tried to challenge this arrangement by trying to untie their oil trade from the dollar. The U.S. immediately gave them, a good dose of democracy, if we can all remember. Saddam was falsely accused of having weapons of mass destruction. They didn't even make up a good story for Gaddafi and, simply said that he was an evil, corrupt oppressor that, needed to go, which is sad.
It is why President Obama has called for Gaddafi to step down, sent warships into the region, and ordered the seizure of $30 billion in Libya assets.
That's perhaps because he remains utterly unconvinced that there is an uprising against him.
No demonstration at all in the streets. No one against us. Against me for what? Because I am not president.
But then
they love me, all my people with me. They love me all.
But if they do love you,
they will die to protect me, my people.
If you say they do love you, then why are they capturing Benghazi and they say they're against you there? Why are they in Zawiya?
It is a guide. It is guide, not my people. It is guide. Guide, yes.
Colonel Gaddafi, the President of the United States, the leaders of Britain and other leaders are calling on you to step down, to leave Libya, to leave your position of power. Will you do that?
Who would leave his homeland? Why do I leave my homeland? Why do I leave Libya?
They are both dead now and both countries are in ruins. The U.S. is the middleman for the world's most lucrative trade. And much of its prosperity depends on keeping it so. With a high demand for the dollars, they keep inflation under control because all countries subsidize the growing money supply when they buy oil, and this has worked brilliantly. The U.S. issues debts like crazy, and despite it's seen as a super cheap debt because everyone wants those, precious dollars to buy oil. This has gone on for over 40 years now. 40 years of fiscal deficit, continuous military intervention in the Middle East, artificial cheap debts, and a manufactured demand for the dollars. All are financed by the entire world's consumption of oil. Meanwhile, globalization has made the dollar the cornerstone of the oil industry and virtually everything else, including the financial industry. But make no mistake, the dollar is the biggest economic bubble ever. There is a massively corrupt and greedy element of geopolitical control in the dollar rotten to the core. Ultimately, greed is today's world's most significant source of hate, sorrow, and even wars. China and Russia are pushing towards a non-US dollar oil market as well. China already has plans for a gold-backed oil futures contract in yuan. China is doing what the US did pre-Nixon time, which made everybody want to buy the dollar at that time. It's already called the game changer for the oil industry. It's by far the biggest threat to the petrodollar right now, and the US is powerless to stop it. They can't invade China like they did with Libya. The Syria affair, which is one of the biggest screw-ups in foreign policy history, will even worsen the already massive PR issue that the U.S. had in the Middle East. Technological advancements like fracking have enabled alternative ways to extract oil. Many countries that once were not traditionally large producers of oil, like Ukraine, have found substantial oil reserves. And as the oil industry becomes more diversified and even decentralized, the monopolistic influence the Saudis had or can have on the oil market is reducing, which means that the U.S. would need to force an increasing number of nations to use the dollar. Times have changed, really, if you look at it. Today, even countries like North Korea can force the U.S. to sit at the negotiation table by threatening to fire a ballistic missile worldwide and flatten an entire city. The world has become, too unstable, and, the stakes are too high to use force as an effective foreign policy instrument, which means the U.S. can no longer defend the system like it once could. The refusal by the U.S. to escalate its intervention in Yemen at the request of the Saudis has caused the U.S.-Saudi alliance to devolve. The Saudis and OPEC retaliated by cutting production and getting friendly with Russia. And this is very significant. Saudi Arabia is considering accepting China's currency for oil purchases instead of the dollar. This move would dent the U.S. dollar's dominance of the global petroleum market and, will mark another shift by, the world's top crude oil exporter towards Asia. Talks with the China yuan priced oil contracts have been off the table for the past 6 years, and still Saudis have grown increasingly unhappy with decades-old U.S. security commitment to defend the kingdom over Biden's administration's attempt to strike a deal with Iran over its nuclear program. And Saudi officials have said that they were shocked by the precipitous U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan 2 years ago. China bought more than 25% of the oil that Saudi Arabia exported. If priced in yuan, those sales will boost the standing China's currency. Coupled with the war in Ukraine and the boycott of Russian oil and gas, it has resulted in a situation reminiscent of the oil shocks in the 70s. I don't think a complete collapse of the petrodollar can happen overnight, though, because the dollar is backed by not just oil, but by the world's biggest economy. It would only partially collapse because the U.S. financial system would just not disappear. Also, the U.S. has become one of the biggest oil producers in the world. So a big chunk of tradings will always be done in U.S. dollars. But as their control weakens, they can only continue running the ridiculous deficits that they currently run with severe consequences. The U.S. government is running, the biggest Ponzi scheme in history. So is every government, using this fiat money, which all of them are. In so doing, they are keeping the entire world's economy hostage to the privately owned Fed. Since 2008, the U.S. has printed trillions of dollars in its quantitative easing programs. Not even the petrodollar can sustain the deficit the U.S. Government is running. In 2012, Iran decided to trade oil only in euros, and America banned them from using SWIFT. As a result, Iran's oil exports plunged from around 2.5 million barrels per day in 2011 to around 1 million barrels per day by 2014. Fast forward to March 2023, Saudi Arabia and Iran signed a peace deal. And who do you think brokered this deal? China, with Washington sitting on the sideline. So Iran has also expressed interest in joining BRICS. As I mentioned, BRICS is a multinational coalition between China, Russia, Brazil, India, and even South Africa. And these countries have agreed to create an economy that is not dependent on the U.S. economy. And right now, even Saudi Arabia is also considering joining BRICS. Now, the 3-day summit between Putin and Xi Jinping had little media attention. Putin announced his readiness to switch to the yuan in foreign trade settlement with countries in Asia, Latin America, and Africa. A year after the invasion of Ukraine led to a slew of Western sanctions against Russia. But on Monday, April 3rd, Bloomberg published an article that China's yuan has replaced the US dollar as the most traded currency in Russia. Another reason that the US dollar is devaluing is the increase in federal debt. Currently, the debt-to-income ratio in America is 130%. When the government has high level of debt, it may struggle to pay off its obligations, leading to a decrease in confidence in the economy and even the dollar value. In addition, as the government continues to borrow more money to finance its debt, it may increase interest rates, which can lead to a decrease in foreign investment. America has 33% of its debt outside of the country. And as I mentioned, majority of the debts in America are owned by Japan and China. That is very funny if you really think about it. So currently, every dollar in the system is someone's debt, and the fractional reserves are no longer at work. The banks are not required to keep any part of our money that we deposit. So 100% of our deposit is put into the market. So we have the liquidity for the banks in America. Well, let me know what you think of this by dropping in your comment. But if you take a critical look at things, what made the dollar vulnerable is abandoning the gold system in 1971 by President Nixon. The gold standard implies that the value of a country's currency is connected to a given amount of gold. So under this gold standard system, government needed to be ready and willing to buy and sell gold to anyone at a set price. It's an old way of transacting. Gold was used to fund trade and wars. In the olden days, what would people accept in exchange for goods and services or even labor? Well, tell me, simply gold. You guessed right. So people wanted something tangible, and something that was valuable. And gold was a great fit because of its limited supply. Honestly, it's, very gorgeous, very beautiful. China is following the paper trail to become the world's dominant currency. Since the dollar is no longer backed by gold standard, it's now set by a mixture of political and economic forces ranging from central bank decisions to frantic buying and selling of traders worldwide. The original arrangement set by Bretton Woods is long dead. Sadly, the dollar in your pocket is backed by nothing more than your belief that you'll be able to buy a hot dog with it. Implications of the dollar falling will lead to a hyperinflation, a catastrophic impact on global trade, and the U.S. would default on its own. The dollar will not fall anytime soon. Is it heading towards the end of its era? Definitely yes. Is it declining in value? Definitely yes. So what can you do? Invest in gold. As I said, China and Russia have been stockpiling in gold in recent years, and they are moving away slowly from using the dollar. Invest in tangible assets such as real estate that will increase in value. Real estate is significantly less volatile than the stocks and rarely loses appreciation or value. One of the most significant selling points as to why the real estate is such a safe investment is that the value typically increases and it yields fabulous long-term profit. Now think of it, whether there is a bad economy or there's a market crash, humans will always need a roof over their head. That is a fact. Make sure to watch this video as well.